So today we're going to be talking about the Industrial Revolution and give you a short introduction to it, and talk about some of the stuff from the packet as well. So hopefully this video will help support the packet, review that material one more time, and get you ready for this quiz, in addition to giving you some background and contextual information so that we can continue with our class activities during class time. So what was the Industrial Revolution? It was an increase really in machine-made goods. So when we talk about the Industrial Revolution, we're talking about industry or business, and revolution meaning change. And so this is a change in the way that we are doing business. And really what it is that we're no longer making goods by hand, and we are instead making goods using machines. So before we get started with the Industrial Revolution, we're going to go back to the pre-industrial society. And that's what you see here in this picture. So what you're looking at is a harvesting scene, and this is depicting pre-industrial village life. The families are working together. They are farming in order to feed their family. There is one field. They're growing grain and oats and barley, and one field is left empty in order to regain fertility. And we'll talk more about crop rotation in a few minutes. This land was divided into strips, and each family was given a number of strips that they were to farm, and that's what they did. So for the season, they tended the pieces of the field that had been assigned to their family, and when it came time to harvest, they would harvest that food and share it among the population of the village equally. Here's some information on it. So you have villages feeding themselves. That's called subsistence farming. Again, if the village made poor decisions and the crops failed, then the village would starve. They would not have enough food to get through the winter. It would be very difficult. Or they would be put in the tough position of trying to trade with a nearby village. But they didn't have much to trade for, and they couldn't afford to buy from nearby villages, nor was it easy to make the trek from one village to the other. I think this is a time before roads, and you're using horses and carriages, and it's difficult during the winter months to move along dirt roads that become muddy and soggy when you have a horse and carriage. So it's true, too, that, as I said a minute ago, that one of three fields would be left fallow. That is, that it's empty. And that would be to allow the soil to regain nutrients and become fertile again, so that in the following year, that field would produce plants. There were no fences during this time, and the animals, whatever animals the villagers owned, would graze in common pastures. Now, there were some disadvantages to this type of farming, and the first is that the land use was very inefficient. When you have so much land and you're leaving a third of it empty, then you're not getting as much food as you could get if you found a way to plant in every field every year and have high crop yields from those fields. In addition, the animals, because there are no fences, would wander into the fields and they would eat the plants or the food that was being grown for human consumption. You also had the idea that the animals, because they are together, grazing together, that if one cow or pig or goat or sheep got sick, that sickness would spread to everybody's animals that were sharing that field. So it was easier for animals to share disease and share sickness, and one animal getting sick could wipe out all of the animals for your village. So that was a scary possibility. Also, as discussed in class, farmers did not experiment with new farming techniques because the other farmers in the village were concerned that should the new technique not work out, that everybody in the village would suffer for that. So they really just stayed with what they knew and did not experiment. So the Agricultural Revolution begins around 1700 in England, and it really is started by the enclosure movement. And so you've got wealthy landlords that buy up the land that the villagers had been farming on. That is, if the land that the villagers had been farming on was not already owned by a wealthy landlord. And then they built fences, and that's the enclosure movement. But because those fences went up, as discussed in class, there was new ways of farming that could be pursued. There were new ways of farming that could be pursued. New crops were created as a result of this experimentation, and corn and potato, for instance, new machines were put to use. And so with a seed drill, the seeds were actually planted into the ground instead of just being spread on top of the dirt, and that resulted in more food. Breeding methods changed, where you bred the biggest and the strongest animals, and you got bigger and stronger baby animals. So lambs, for example, went from 18 pounds to 50 pounds because of the breeding methods. And with crop rotation, there would be no more empty fields. And so crop rotation is explained on this next slide here. And what it means is that we are going to take the crops in our fields, and each year we're going to rotate them by one quadrant. So wheat might be grown in that top left field this year, and wheat is going to take nutrient A out of the earth, and there will be no more nutrient A at the end of the growing season because all of it has gone to the wheat. So in the second field, we're going to be growing barley, and barley is dependent on nutrient B. So in the top right field where the barley is being grown, there is a lot of excess nutrient A, and there's no more nutrient B. So next year, we're going to plant the wheat where we grew the barley, and there's going to be a lot of nutrient A for that wheat, and so the wheat will grow like gangbusters in the top right field next year. Meanwhile, barley, we're going to move down to where we grew clover. Clover is also a nutrient A crop. So all the A is gone from the clover field, but barley needs B, right? So barley is going to grow like crazy in the bottom right. Clover will move to the left, turnips will move up. And so with each crop, we're going to rotate it by one quadrant, and the nutrients will be there for the new crop that's being grown. In doing this, we no longer have to leave fields empty, and we can increase the amount of food that we're producing each year. So the results of the agricultural revolution are many. First, farmers become tenant farmers, which means they're renting land from the new landowners, or they're forced to move to cities to find a job. And food production is going to increase. And so in 1700, one farmer could make enough food for 1.7 people, or in other terms, 10 farmers would make enough food for 17 people. But by 1800, 10 farmers are making enough food for 25 people. So you go from 17 people fed to 25 people fed, the same number of farmers. So there's an increase in food production. Now, because people are eating more, they're healthier, they're living longer, and they're also making more babies. So when people are healthier and well-fed and have a decent place to stay, then they tend to have babies. And so population is going to increase. Also, because we're healthier, we're living longer, and so we don't have people dying as young as they were before, which is another way that population is going to increase. So between a larger birth rate and a slower death rate, our population expands, and this leads to urbanization, or the growth of cities. Or some of these people, because of the era we're talking about, moved to the colonies in the New World because it was getting a little bit crowded there in Old England. So folks are now moving to the cities, and they're looking for work because they've been either forced off the land or they've become a tenant farmer. But if they were forced off the land and they go to the cities, then they're looking for jobs. And so some of these people actually started their own businesses out of their home. So this is mentioned in the packet, though we did not talk about it in class today. And so the cottage industry is what it's called. It's also called the domestic system. It is also called the putting out system. So lots of different names for this phase or this era of capitalism. Essentially, it goes like this. The villagers needed extra money because they are no longer farming. They need an income so that they can pay their bills and buy food. So what they do is they open their home to business, and they start working from home. And what would happen is a wealthy merchant, say that's me, I have this idea that I want to sell red fabric at the market, and I'm going to make money from that. Well, I don't have the ability myself, nor do I want to. I don't want to take the raw cotton and turn it into red fabric. So instead, what I'm going to do is I am going to bring the raw materials to your house, and you are going to do the work for me. And I'm going to pay you for doing that work. Now, each cottage is going to have a different purpose. So the first cottage that I go to, it might be that that cottage specializes in removing the seeds from the cotton. And I go at the end of the week and I pick up my seedless cotton and I pay the cottage the money that is owed to them for doing the work. Then I, as the merchant, take the seedless cotton to the next cottage, and the next cottage is going to specialize in weaving. And then the next cottage will specialize in dyeing the fabric. And when all is said and done, after my product has gone from cottage to cottage to cottage, being turned from cotton into thread, and then woven in a loom to create fabric, and then dyed the color red, when all is said and done, and I pick up the red fabric from the last cottage, I have put a lot of money into this system. I paid for the cotton, and then I paid at each cottage along the way. And so you all have made your money, and you're fine, and you're working on the next entrepreneur's materials. Meanwhile, I am in debt. I've paid out a lot of money. Now what I am hoping for is that I will take my red cotton, my red fabric, I will go to the market and I will sell it for a big profit. And that is what happened. The merchants were able to make huge profits doing this. And for the villagers, it worked out because this was an alternative source of money for them. So these are the folks that had been farming in the pre-industrial society. They've been forced off from that land and they're looking for work. Now, this is the period between the pre-industrial society and the growth of factories. So this was a short-term era in the Industrial Revolution, the domestic system or the putting out system or cottage industry. This was short term between farming as a village at subsistence level and working in factories. So for a short while, what folks did is they worked out of their homes in the cottage industries. The thing is that soon enough, the entrepreneurs were after such a profit that they were demanding more and more material be done. And frankly, the cottage industries could not keep up with the demand. Workers in the cottages could not work fast enough to keep up with what the entrepreneurs were demanding and what customers were demanding. So how do we speed up production? And the answer is with machines. Unfortunately, the machines that were being used were too large and too expensive to fit into a cottage. The cottage industries, the entrepreneurs working out of their own homes could not afford to buy these big machines, nor did they have room in their home for them. So the entrepreneur, that would be me in this scenario, comes up with a new idea. Well, what if instead of going from cottage to cottage, I build a factory, I build a big building, and I buy the big machines, and I hire workers to come to my place to do the work. And this is the growth then of factories. So we've got larger factories, and these machines are going to use water power, and water power, as we know, had been used for centuries to grind grain and do other sorts of work. And so now we're going to use, and I think you can see my mouse cursor here, we're going to build these factories near rivers, and we're going to use the force of the water, the running water, to turn this wheel. And this wheel is going to be turning machines inside. And so the water here could do as many as like 100 machines at a time. So these factories are going to be able to produce a lot more and be able to do that a lot faster. And so this is the answer to the deficiency in the cottage industry. Cottages cannot keep up, but factories can. So the problem is that factories can only be made next to rivers. So is there another way that we might be able to power these machines where there is no water? So we want the flexibility to have a factory anywhere, even a factory, which would be a lot easier, right next to the natural resource that we're using. So if it is an iron smelting factory, if it is a coal mining operation, is there a way that we can build a factory near our sources of power, so near coal, for example, or near our natural resource that we're using? And so through the scientific process, through innovation and invention and discovery, we come up with a steam engine. And this is attributed to James Watt, but it is important to know that James Watt was not the first person to build the steam engine. He simply perfected the steam engine. And it was first put to use in coal mines. So you use heat and water that is going to create steam. The steam creates pressure, and the pressure is going to be the force that is going to make the machine work. So if you think about this, as most of you have probably boiled water before, so you have a pot of water on the stove, there's a lid on that pot, and so you've got heat and water, and that starts to create steam. And so if you were to let that water boil and then you removed the lid from the pot, what would happen with the steam? The steam is going to rush out, right? It goes up, and hopefully you've turned on the fan above your stove, and the fan is going to suck all that steam into it so that you don't have, water all over your kitchen or steam all over your kitchen. So that force of the steam rushing up and out of the pot is the pressure that we're talking about. And if you can harness that pressure, you can create power. So this is an example of a steam engine, a working steam engine. And I'm just going to pause for a second, let you kind of watch it. So you've got heat, and the heat is creating pressure, steam. And when that pressure is released, it rushes into the new area, and that causes the machine to grow. So here with my mouse cursor, we're heating water, and you can see that the pressure is built up. Right here, it's built up. And then we're going to remove these pins and like taking the lid off from the top of a pot, and we're going to let that steam rush out. And when it rushes out, that steam, we're going to harness it. It's going to push this lever down, which pulls this. And what this is doing is acting like a suction. And so what they're doing is suctioning water out of the ground and then damming it up right here so the water can't go back down, and releasing the water over here, which will put the water right here in this bucket. So what this steam engine is doing is it's pulling water out of the mine shafts so that workers can continue to get down into those mine shafts and they can mine for coal. So that's what this is. So this is what the steam engine looked like. But of course, this is not going to work in a factory. This is an outside steam engine, right? So we take this idea, this technology of how it works, and apply it to small machines that can be used in factories. And that's what we have here. It's a similar process where you're heating water, harnessing the pressure. That pressure, as it moves from a high pressure area to a low pressure area, creates force. And then that force is going to make this wheel turn. And as this wheel turns, you now have a machine. So I will show you some video of this and how it worked in class in the coming days. So now we have new needs, right? We have power, we have factories, we're producing quite a bit of stuff, but we do have new needs. What we need now is we need natural resources. We need iron for making machines and buildings and bridges. So from 1814, we had 571,000 tons of iron. But by 1852, England was producing over 1 million tons, which was over half of the world's production. Now we also need coal, mostly to fuel steam engines. So in 1700, Britain was producing 2.5 million tons of coal, but by 1800, that number had ballooned to over 16 million tons. So we need a lot of iron and coal to fuel the Industrial Revolution. All right, so that was a little bit not included in the packet. And so we're going to return to the packet. So why did Britain industrialize first? And this is something that is addressed in the packet. I'm going to go over some of those reasons now. So first of all, Britain had all of the factors of production. So what are the factors of production? Well, there are 4. There are 3, and I'm throwing an extra one in. So the extra one I'm going to throw in is entrepreneurship. And this is essentially somebody who has the vision and the drive to create a small business. They want to pull together the other 3 factors of production, and they want to create a business out of it. So the other 3 factors of production are land. And when I say land here, I'm talking specifically about natural resources. So you have to have natural resources in order to be able to produce something. So if you're producing a shoe, then you need rubber, and you need leather, and you need cotton, and you're going to put those pieces together and you're going to make a shoe, right? So you need natural resources, land. You need labor. That is, you need folks to work for you that are going to do the work required to make the thing that you're producing. So if you're making shoes, you need people that are going to put those natural resources together to create the shoe. And you need capital. And capital are the tools required to do the work. So if you're making shoes, you're going to need the tools for making shoes. And because I'm not a shoemaker, I don't know what those are. But you would need, for instance, a stretcher to stretch the leather. You would need a loom in order to weave the cotton into shoelaces. You are going to need machines that are going to help you process the rubber and create the soles. Back in the 1800s, it probably wasn't even rubber yet. It was wood at that point. So you're going to need somebody who's going to be able to work with wood and the machines required to make the soles of a shoe. So land is the natural resources, labor, that's the people that are going to work for you, and capital are the machines or tools that you're going to use to build whatever it is you're building. It is also the money, because of course, in order to get the natural resources and pay your laborers, you have to have money. It's the old adage, you got to have money to make money. So Britain has all of the factors of production. This allows them to industrialize very quickly relative to other countries. Textiles was the first industry that industrialized, and that's because everybody needs clothes. Textiles is fabric. There were new inventions and improvements that came along with that, and it sped up the industry. Some of the new tools or machines that were used, the spinning jenny, where it spun 16 threads at a time, and spinning and weaving at this point was moved out of the home and into the factories. And if you look at the size of this machine in relation to the size of the woman working it, this machine would not fit in her home. This would be much too big for the cottages. Let's see. The water frame was also very large. It spun stronger yarn than before. The spinning mule spun thin yarn. So here are some examples of those machines. Again, they're very large machines. They are not going to fit in someone's home. The power loom used power. That's a little redundant, but this is going to be the wheels moving using the steam engine, and it's going to make this power loom go. And the cotton gin, which you may have learned about in 8th grade with Eli Whitney. So those are some of the machines that are used. What else? Britain also had, and I'm going to skip ahead here. Britain also had, oops, too far. Sorry, guys. Water transportation. And so what Britain had to help them industrialize first was they used steam power to power their boats, but Britain also worked to create canals and waterways. They had a lot of natural waterways as it was already, the ability to move products from one place to another. But this is another reason that Britain was able to industrialize first, is that the government really worked with businesses to make this a conducive environment for industry to grow. Also, other reasons that Britain industrialized first include the idea that they are an island nation. and that they were physically separated from the Napoleonic Wars going on in the rest of Europe. This allowed Britain to focus on industrializing on their domestic issues, as opposed to having to prepare for and actually defend themselves against foreign aggressors. That was helpful as well. And their environment, their weather. So it is moist, the air is moist, and it allows the textiles, the fabric, to remain loose and pliable, as opposed to a very dry climate where your fabric gets very stiff. So if you've ever gone swimming and you dry off and you put your towel out and you lay it down in the sun to dry, when you come back to that towel after it's dry, you might notice that it's a little bit stiff, it's a little bit rough. It's not nice and soft like it is when it comes out of the dryer. And that's because it's a dry heat that's dried it, and it removes the flexibility from the fabric. So Britain industrialized first in textiles specifically because they had the right climate for that. So I've covered some of the stuff. We've covered the enclosure movement, the agricultural revolution, the increase in food, which allowed for more population, and then the shift of population from the countries into the cities, as well as covering factory life and how factories were different from the domestic system or the cottage industries or the putting out system or whatever you would like to call that era. So a lot of this, most of it, has been covered in the packet as well, and there are some questions on the quiz about these topics. So please do pay close attention. We're looking for impacts of the factory system, how it changed the relationship between workers and factory owners, and looking at the two new classes of people that came about as a result of these changes, looking at the impact of the enclosure movement. So it's important that you understand what that did and how that forced people off land, but also how Parliament was impacted by the enclosure movement. And the fact that this was all an economic revolution more than a technology revolution. So I have not covered that in this video, but it is in the text. I hope this has been helpful, and if you have any questions, please come see me, and otherwise, study for that quiz, and good luck.